Ooh, 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 ooh.
All right, come on. There we go. All righty. Allow people a little bit of. What about now?
Yeah, that's
Sorry.
good.
There's a thing right here that it'll mute it. So I think when I adjust the volume, it hits it. So, but we got us kind of going to our high school before we get going, talking about the Carolina Clemson and college football games from yesterday. Got us a state championship in the high school teams that we cover. Congratulations to the PD Academy Eagles. Finished a perfect season. I believe they finished 13-0
Yep.
with a dominating state championship win over Bethesda Academy. Man, we'll dive more into that in our high school recap episode that'll drop on Tuesday. But man, that was such a fun game to go to. I'm glad I was able to get there. PD won 52-14, and shut out Bethesda in the second half. So they got some athletes on that team, man.
Yeah.
They do. I mean, it was never in doubt. Like Bethesda had a couple big plays. That they got first touchdown they got outside, and then the second one just poor tackling. But they had their way. That was a dominating performance. So happy for Coach King and that staff. Two state championships in 3 years. So that's not an easy. One's at 3A level, this one at the 2A level. So it's a big honor. I know a lot of those fans were happy. Big showing. So we'll hop right into it. Steven's gonna have to carry the load this episode. I didn't get to watch hardly any of the day games yesterday. So I don't know how to
You went
act.
to bed before the night games even ended.
Yeah, I was tired, man. That was a long day. But I did get to watch the only one I didn't finish watching is the A&M Auburn game. Alabama, Oklahoma was over. So it's that was okay. So let's get right into it. We'll start with South Carolina versus Wofford. Coming in, you always were uneasy playing Wofford because in years past they were always one of those teams that ran the triple option, and that's never a good recipe because you can't spend a lot of time, preparing for it because hardly no other teams at the Power 5, power level run it outside of Georgia Tech when Paul Johnson was there. But needless to say, got the win 56-12. I know the first half was kind of shaky and rocky. First quarter, not the best. Steven, give your thoughts on the game.
Overall, big win. They covered the spread. Spread was 42.5. They covered it with 9 seconds to go in the game.
The 9 seconds.
Yeah. First half was just sloppy. It wasn't like we were playing bad. It was just like stupid penalties, a missed tackle, just miscues really. And it kind of looked like they rolled into the game. You've won 4 in a row. You're taking on an opponent that's kind of obviously a level below you. And it was almost like they came into the game just thinking, all right, we should just walk in and just be able to do what we want to do. First play of the game was a little bubble screen that they were just out of position on 63 yards. I mean, I think we ended up giving up 200. I'm trying to get the total stats here. We gave up 252 yards, and 63 of them were on the first play of the game on just a busted, just out of position really. But and then you have that they get a field goal. You're holding to a field goal. We get the ball. Lenore throws the interception on second or third play. And I didn't see it, the interception. I had walked outside for a minute, but Obviously, he
I did
settles
see
down
it.
right after that.
Yeah.
But overall, good game for the Gamecocks. You were able to
Yeah.
get some of your second and third string guys in. Obviously, not as soon as probably they had in the game plan. But honestly, to me, uh, sometimes it's better to leave those starters in a little bit longer. You don't
Mhm.
want them to sit too long. You want them to kind of stay in rhythm. So playing into the third quarter, obviously you have the risk of injuries in a game like this, but you also kind of stay in a rhythm. Some of these guys that we have been using a little bit more frequently now that haven't had as much play time, like Campbell, using Nick Harbor a little bit more, some of our running backs. You want to get those guys reps with your first string as well, especially if they're going to be people that you're going to start to depend on. Obviously, we have one game left in the season, then the bowl game, or what could potentially happen. We don't know, but you want to get those guys some reps with the first string. You want your young starters to stay in rhythm. So overall, in the second half, they came out and looked like exactly what you would want them to do. It was just I'd say a sloppy quarter and a half to start the game.
Yeah, I going back to before I give my thoughts on the game, the interception Lenore's threw, I think the ball just stayed up in the air way too long.
Yeah.
He tried to kind of drop it in there where it should have been maybe a more like on the line throw.
Yeah.
And because it just allowed the safety for Walford to get to the ball. But listen, as great of a season as he's having, or any quarterback has, there mistakes are going to happen. But it's how you rebound, and it seems like he rebounded strong. The most concerning thing for me was giving up the 3 sacks and then the 8 penalties for 67 yards. Kind of from what I've read, some of the penalties early were pretty stupid. I think we had an interception that penalty called it back. I don't think it was a touchdown, like a pick six, but we had a stupid penalty that called it back. And then, but that's just stuff you just don't want to see as we finish our 11th game.
Yeah.
Like that's stuff you want to see. You don't ever want to see it, but if it's going to happen, that's stuff you want to see at the beginning of the year. But 608 total yards of offense, 343 through the air, 265 on the ground. Lenore's went 23, 27, 307 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. I think he's got the most total touchdowns for any quarterback in college football the past month. I think that's what I read.
That's what I just had pulled up, that Lenore Sellers leads the nation in passing touchdowns this month. He has 12 so far.
Yeah. Rocket Sanders, 72 rushing yards, 1 touchdown. I think, and I said this last week, and something we've talked about. I've really been impressed with the receiving core the past couple weeks. Delvon Campbell has had 2 back-to-back week big games. Nick Harbor's continually improving, getting into it. Lard Verdan. I did watch the highlights that ESPN puts up on YouTube. That touchdown pass to Lard Verdan, I think that was a great play. I don't know if you saw it, but it was almost like he was going to block or do like a pick play and then just took off. That was a great play call. The only thing that's concerning for me, kind of getting, looking ahead to Clemson week, is the health of our tight ends. Josh Simon was in a boot yesterday. Michael Simon didn't play. When you got Luke Doty in at tight end, that's not something you ever want to see. Not discounting him. But overall, just a big, good win for South Carolina. I know Dylan Stewart and Kyle Kennard had a sack apiece, and they're inching closer. Kennard's inching closer to Clowney's
single
season record, and then Stewart is inching closer to Clowney's freshman season record. So it's outside that first quarter, it seems, that first drive really, Walford couldn't really do anything on offense. I think total. Caleb asked why didn't Simon play. I think he got hurt in the Missouri game because he was in a walking boot, from what I heard yesterday. So I think maybe he could have gone. I think just erring on the side of caution where this was not a game that should never been in question. So it's probably something just the best to hold him out, try to get him healthy.
Yeah.
But defense allowed 247, like you mentioned, only 28 rushing yards. So, again, I know it's Walford, but the showing the defense had on the rushing game last week, that was nice to see for them to come back and have a better game on that front on the defensive side of the ball. I don't have much else to say. I didn't get to watch it, so I don't really have a whole lot of thoughts. And it's Walford, so it's not like it was.
There's not a whole lot to dissect.
Yeah.
The big thing for me is, like, if you're gonna here at the end of the year, if you're gonna have one of those games where it's just like, all right, what the crap are we doing? Why are we having these stupid penalties? Let's have it at a Walford. Let's go ahead and get it out of your system.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is good to kind of have that where if you just have a game like, where you just come out, you dominate a team like Walford, nothing really goes wrong. You just do what you're supposed to do. You kind of go into that film week and there's nothing really to work on. And then sometimes it's better to have stuff to work on. Sometimes it's better for coaches to be able to get up in the players and have something to fuss about than to just say, hey, we've been rolling, let's continue to roll. Sometimes it's better to say, hey, we look like crap here. Let's fix this before we go into this biggest game of the year.
Yeah.
And for that to be a quarter and a half where you can have something to chew them out about, sometimes you need that because, like I said, second half, they look like what you would expect in this Wofford game. Another key thing is, after Lenore did throw the interception, he completed his next 17 passes.
Yeah.
I mean, at one point he was 17-18, and that one incompletion was the interception on his first or second pass of the game. Overall, you did what you were supposed to do. Covered the spread. Like you said, there's really not much more to say about a Wofford game.
Yeah, and it's kind of going to be the same thing about the Clemson Citadel game. Let me look up that line because I did not get to watch those highlights. But a strong win for Clemson. One that was never in question as well. Like the South Carolina game. Did you get to watch any of that one, Steven?
I didn't. I was watching other meaningful games.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, they started at 3:30 and we started at 4. So I didn't even – I think I was going to try and turn it on, and whenever I did, it was like already 14-0. I was like, this is pointless.
Yeah. It was 35-0 going into halftime. K 12 of 16, 198 yards, 3 touchdowns. It's kind of like the South Carolina game where they played majority of their bench. I think the second half. Yeah. They had I don't know. Clemson's and we hadn't gotten to watch as much of it, but Clemson's defense kind of. If I'm a Clemson fan, like that defense concerns me a little bit. Where I guess they're just so used to being this dominating force, but I think they gave up almost 300 yards of rushing yards last night, and you can factor in that was maybe second, third string. I don't know, but I don't know. It seems to be that's been the theme for their defense all season long, where they hadn't really been able to stop the run that much.
Yeah. I didn't watch it. I just don't think. They pulled out a lot. The Citadel almost scored at the very end of the game. They had the ball within the 10-yard line, and I think they went for it on 4th down and didn't get it. So, I mean, it could have been 51-21. Again, Clemson had probably their 3rd or 4th string in at that point, but not much you can say about this game. They had a clean game. I'll give them that from what I could tell.
Yeah.
They didn't have any sloppiness like South Carolina did. They came out from opening kickoff, did exactly what they should have done in this game. Yeah, I'm not much to say about this one.
That's the most we're going to get out of this one today. The next week is rivalry week. It is hate week. Carolina, Clemson, all the big rivals. And it could
potentially be the biggest Palmetto Bowl, the most important, I would say.
Yeah.
With all the chaos that's happened this week, I'm thinking some more chaos is going to happen this coming up week. And with South Carolina and Clemson sitting right there on the cusp, this could be the biggest Palmetto Bowl that's ever been played, or the most important at least.
Let's jump right into it. A lot of upsets. We're not gonna, if you're okay with this, Stephen, let's not spend too much time talking about what it means for Carolina and Clemson. I think we're going to do like a preview this week, hopefully. So we'll spend more time in that episode doing it because we can react to the college football playoff rankings. We can preview the Carolina Clemson game, and then we can dive into all the what if scenarios. But what we'll discuss today is what we know and kind of how it might shake up and where Carolina and Clemson might land in the rankings, and then we'll react to it next week, previewing the Carolina Clemson game and some more rival games. So the first one we'll start off with, and we'll start with Kansas, Colorado. Kansas, I mean, they're playing some dang good football right now. Beat Colorado 37-21, pretty convincing fashion. So coming in, Clemson was at 7, Carolina was at 18. So that's one domino to fall. A 16-ranked team. And then you've got, hold on. What were the other upsets yesterday?
BYU at 14th. They're ranked 14th. They lost Arizona State.
There it is. Okay. Yep.
I guess you would call that an upset, but it was a higher ranked team losing to a lower ranked team. But I really wouldn't say that was a domino that needed to fall for either Carolina or Clemson. But I wouldn't really say that was an upset. Arizona State's obviously at the top of the Pac-12, and I'm assuming that they will get into that championship game now.
The Pac-12 is such a bad conference.
Yeah,
or is it the Big 12? It's the Big 12.
Big 12, yeah, Big 12.
Yeah. Pac-12's got like 2 teams.
Yeah,
I think I think that's right. So BYU, Arizona State. Then we'll move on to Auburn, Texas A&M, which you apparently stayed up and watched, which I'm proud of you. You did good yesterday.
Yeah.
Watched some football.
I did.
The fact
that Auburn Texas A&M game was insane because Auburn jumps out 21-0. Crowd was going crazy. It just seemed like they were going to run away with it. But then this Texas A&M team, I will give them this. They've gotten down big in games multiple times and just clawed their way right back in it. They're not a team that just gives up. I'll give them that. They don't give up. They keep fighting to get back in it, and they obviously they did. They ended up taking the lead at one point in this game, and then Auburn, they just obviously they're fighting for a bowl game because now with 5 wins they got a chance. If they beat Bama next week to climb it or crawl into a bowl game. So this was a big one for Auburn. And I'll say this, as right now as a Cowboys fan, I'm watching them tank, and I want them to tank, and I want them to lose. That is a good thing about college is like there is no tanking. These teams have, even when they only have 3 or 4 wins, they're still playing for something. They're still playing to try and get a bowl game or just whatever it is. You don't see these teams where you can say, oh, this is a 4-7, 4-6 Auburn team. They're just going to come in and not give us a game. Like, no, they're going to try and beat you. Yeah. They're going to try and cause chaos in your season. So,
the thing with NFL compared to college is NFL, okay, if we're not good and we tank, more likely we're going to get the first overall pick, and you don't have to recruit like you do in college. And honestly, you can't really tank in college football because you'll get fired. I mean, there's no guarantee you're going to get certain recruits because you tank. So but the fact that Texas A&M was on the brink, and honestly, they very well still could make it to the SEC championship game. Because I mean, it was. We'll discuss the Ohio State Indiana game because there's a lot of hoopla and talk surrounding Indiana, and going into this game against Ohio State where they didn't deserve to be ranked where they were at. They've got a weak strength of schedule. And honestly, I think Ohio State could have I think the final score could have been a lot worse than what it was. So you had the SEC fans or however you want to label them kind of trashing Indiana, saying they never deserve to be there. But then you've got Georgia, who kind of struggles against UMass for majority of the game.
Yeah.
Alabama losing to Oklahoma. It's not that they just lost; it's the way they lost. Like, they did not look good at all. Again, Texas A&M playing in Auburn, which is not an easy place to play. But Texas A&M still had a realistic chance at the college football playoff, trying to make the SEC championship game. Loses in triple overtime to Auburn. But again, the Alabama game, man, that I think by the time we got home, it was the start of the second half, and Jalen Milroe threw like the 2 interceptions in a row, and one was a pick six. And like you rewind the clock back like 2 weeks ago, he looked so good against LSU, and then it's like when they get down, I don't know. He's just not to me, doesn't seem like a capable quarterback. Like, you don't know what you're going to get week in and week out. And now you've got Alabama sitting at 3 losses. You got Ole Miss losing at Florida. They've now got 3 losses. A&M's got 3 losses. It's like the week college football slate just got drunker the longer the day went on. And it's like, I have no idea what like 1 through 12 is going to look like.
Yeah. I mean, here's the other thing is like some of the teams that did win that were in, that the top 12 or whatever, like Penn State. Penn State barely survives a game against a 4-win Minnesota. Like they should have lost that game. And the thing is like Penn State kind of falls in that same boat as Indiana. Like, who have they beat? Like, they're up there. They have a loss to Ohio State, and then outside of that, they haven't really beat anybody of note. And then you have a game, you get down to the end of the season when it's, like the committee says, they want to see how you're playing right now. Again, Penn State, they didn't look good. They got their win. I don't expect them to fall out. But I mean, they didn't look good. And you have teams that have more losses than them that look like a whole different team. They look better. They played against, a South Carolina, Clemson has looked better. There's just some of these teams that are up there, and they've kind of gotten there from playing a weak schedule. Yeah, they have no wins of note. It's just there was one more I thought that just did, like Miami. There's that scoreboard, that final score doesn't tell you how that game was actually going. And you can say this a lot about Miami's season. They've had a lot of games where they just are fighting to win the game, and then all of a sudden they just have a few plays at the very end where they blow it out. But I mean, 42-14, that doesn't tell you the story of that game. Like, Miami did not look good. Miami, I think at one point it was a touchdown game or it was a field goal game at half. And they, like I said, Miami scored like 2 or 3 touchdowns right there at the very end on just like
it was 2014 at halftime.
Yeah, I mean, Miami, they should be the ones on upset alert this week. They got to go to Syracuse, and Syracuse playing good football right now. Got 7 or 8 wins. Syracuse could very much be ranked whenever the new rankings come out. But going to Syracuse, no matter what Syracuse's record is, it's always hard to play there. And just the way that Miami's look, they pretty much look bad for 3/4 of a game, and then they'll blow a team out at the end. I don't think they're going to have an opportunity with that with this Syracuse team.
Yeah, and you mentioned Miami. I have 2 teams that are in the top 5 rankings that should be on upset alert this week. It's the Texas Longhorns. They've got to go to Texas A&M, play at Kyle Field. It's not an easy place to play. It's going to be a night game. Texas has not beaten a ranked opponent all year. That are now ranked. Let me rephrase it. I feel like you can argue back and forth about that. And like you mentioned, Miami going to Syracuse, Miami, they didn't score in the third quarter yesterday, put up 22 in the fourth quarter. So it's going to be an interesting week. Just the Alabama game, man, that really threw me for a loop. I mean, I don't know.
There was a few dominoes that I said South Carolina needed to happen this week to have a shot going into this Clemson game, and that was Colorado losing, that was BYU losing, and then maybe one more upset. I something told me that Auburn Texas A&M game, watch that one, and the line was only like 2 or 3, so Vegas was thinking the same thing. So those three were some that I thought would happen. I think I texted you. I know I texted someone else, and I was like, don't take Alabama losing at Oklahoma off your card, because that was one that you needed to watch as well. Just the other upsets that happened were just kind of, I think there was 6 teams that lost yesterday within that are ahead of South Carolina.
Yeah. Let me put this question up on the board. Levi asked a question. If Alabama, who has a win over South Carolina, has 3 losses, and Ole Miss, you have to have Bama lose to Alabama. Excuse me. You have to have Alabama lose to Auburn if we have a shot. Honestly, man, I don't know. Like, I mean, I think the committee does take the head-to-head into account, but I think you have to look at the way the teams are playing. You
also have to look at when did these losses come.
Well, LSU had the same record as South Carolina heading into this week, but you can definitely tell South Carolina is the better team at this point in time than LSU is. Now, if both are playing the same, that's a different story. Then I think you do have the head-to-head factor in.
He's been saying this all year. You got 9 teams. He told me the Big Ten was better because they had better teams in their conference. Their whole 4 ranked teams that they had, where the SEC had 9. You have good teams going head-to-head every week. You don't have teams like Penn State who have played nobody. You've got ranked teams playing ranked teams. You have teams that are, have good players on them that are fighting. Like, you can say the SEC's mid all you want, but they're a juggernaut, and nobody wants to come in and play these schedules. Nobody wants to come in and play these schedules. Of the top 10, if you were not an SEC team, their strength of schedule was 50 or above. Every SEC team has a strength of schedule that is below 50, besides maybe one school, I think.
Yeah.
Which was, I think Texas has the weakest schedule in the SEC.
So let's get back to his original question. Again, I think when you're discussing head to head and you've got the same records, I think that is like, if they're playing the same at the same level, I think it is taken into account. But if the way Alabama lost to Oklahoma last night, I don't think they scored a touchdown. I could be wrong, and you could definitely tell, like, one team is on the up, one team's on the decline. So I think that's something that's taken into account. His comment about the SEC, I don't know, man. Like, obviously we're Gamecock fans. We play in the SEC. But this is just my view on rankings in general. And this can go to college basketball and college football, where the blue bloods that you can call them, the Alabamas, whoever, they're always going to be in these preseason rankings. They're always going to be in the rankings, and they're always going to be up high. And
Notre Dame, Penn State, all of these teams.
The thing is again, it's hard to it's hard to pinpoint who deserves to be where. And when you've got, the one big knot the SEC has is that the majority of these other conferences play 9-game conference schedules. Well, also at the same time, whether you agree with it or not, traditionally top to bottom, the SEC's generally tougher than the ACC, for example, or the Big Ten at the bottom. And so I don't know, like, it's hard to draw like a line to, like, do I think 2 of the best teams in the country are the Big Ten? Yes. But there's also a question mark surrounding 2 of the other top 10 teams in the Big Ten, in Penn State and Indiana, where they haven't played, or won a game against a ranked team this year. Penn State had to come back and beat USC on the road. That's not traditionally a tough place to play. Looking at where USC's at now is not good. Indiana's toughest test they had this season was yesterday at Ohio State, and they lost by 3 touchdowns. And so but when you've got, it doesn't help the SEC's narrative when one of your better teams throws a dud against Oklahoma last night. Yeah. You've got Texas A&M going into Auburn, who's struggling to get a bowl game, lose in 3 overtime. So it's like, it doesn't help the narrative, or help an argument when they have those games and you're losing to kind of the middle tier teams in the conference. So it's like this, I feel like this is the year where you don't truly know who there's no, usually in the past 1 through 4, you knew who they were. It was pretty cut and dry. And so as you expand the playoffs, you're always going to have these, arguments on who deserves to be here or who deserves to be there. But this is the first year where I truly don't know who the top 12 teams are. I couldn't even tell you who the top 2 teams are.
Yeah.
And it's if Oregon, I don't know. I think Oregon's probably the best team in the country. I think if everything is clicking for Georgia, they are the best. I think they could be the best team in the country, but Carson Beck and that offense is just too inconsistent this year to really.
The thing is, with an Oregon, it's so easy to say, and I'm not saying that they're not, but it's easy to say man, they just look like the best team. They're playing the 52 toughest schedule in the nation. When you look at Georgia and you say, okay, they've had some games where they didn't look amazing. Well, they're playing the number 1 toughest schedule in the nation. These teams that are playing tough games week in and week out, that it starts to affect you in some of these other ones. So an Alabama, who's been, kind of crawling back in this season, they were looking better, but it takes a toll on you to play tough game after tough game after tough game. And then, okay, you do get a team like Oklahoma that hasn't been doing well. Well, you're freaking worn out, man, from just scratching and clawing your entire season. Or you can be a team like Indiana who just play nobody after nobody after nobody, and it's just you're fresh. And you're not really having to do a whole lot in each of these games. It's tough. You can say whatever you want to about it, but I mean, when you look at the Big Ten, you'll say Oregon and Ohio State. You could not literally give me another team where you would say, okay, yeah, that's a really good team. Penn State is not good. Indiana, not good.
I feel
not elite, not great.
I feel like Penn State is kind of like Notre Dame, where they're always going to be there, but when you put them in the big games, they always just fall short. I mean, the times they put Notre Dame in the college football playoff when it was the 4 teams, they got demolished. I think you can play a bunch of what ifs. Tennessee losing to Arkansas, not a great loss. I think people kind of overhyped Tennessee this year, where they had the success the past couple seasons with Hendon Hooker. They had the big freshman and Nico Imaliava coming in, but he's kind of been underwhelming. He had the big win, the big time performance in the bowl game last year against Iowa. But the more tape you get on, the more tape these other teams get on you, the more they can prepare for you, and then it's up to you and the coaching staff to adjust. I feel like this whole argument surrounding the SEC and the Big Ten it's just going to be something that's just going to be in an infinite time loop, where it's you've got people who, and I tend to lean more towards the SEC, but I also understand people's arguments on the other side but again, it just goes back to these preseason rankings where all these teams that are traditionally propped up are there. And then it's you don't have anywhere to put them if they win, this team was already ranked, but then they don't look that good. So why were they ranked? You look back in retrospect, Oklahoma shouldn't. The fact that Oklahoma was ranked in the preseason's a joke.
Yeah.
And so it's just,
Or even
I
the
don't
way
know.
that they handled the rankings during the season. Like Notre Dame lost to North Texas and never fell
Northern
out.
Illinois.
Northern Illinois, whoever it was, terrible team. They lose to them and they never fell out of the top 25.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I
you
just think
lose to
the
a team like
SEC's
that,
been,
and
I just think the SEC's been very beneficial for, or very appreciative for like Georgia and Alabama the past decade, maybe, or a little under. Again,
but here's the
I
thing
do think
too,
it is. I
is
do
I
think
think
it is the best conference. But again, as especially as the way these expansions happen, all the best teams are just going to SEC and Big Ten. So it's like I just think it's you just pick your poison and who you think is the best.
yeah. The other thing with the SEC that I will say is like some of the bottom half of the teams are starting to get better. Some of that is with the portal. Some of that is because these kids want to play and they want to play now. You've got money at some of these schools that you can traditionally, say that they aren't good teams, like a Vanderbilt. Like you can go out and get these guys to come there now and be a better team. Yeah, they have that bad loss, but overall they've had a better year this year and play a tough schedule. I mean, they've had to play Alabama, they've had to play Texas, they've played South Carolina, they got to play Tennessee next week. And look, don't take them beating Tennessee off your card. I mean, they got to go to Vanderbilt, and again, that's not a tough place to play. But it's still, with the momentum that Vanderbilt has this year, that's not one that you can easily just look at now as a Tennessee fan or as Tennessee in general and say, yeah, this is an easy win. Like they could very well go into Vanderbilt and lose that game.
But the great thing we have now is we have a 12-team playoff. So these arguments people are making, and they're just, and they have every right, to feel the way or however you want to label it. These teams are going to play each other.
Yep.
And so you got the people in the Big Ten saying SEC teams aren't ready for the cold weather up north and stuff like that. It's you take what you can get. But I'm very interested to see with all these upsets and all these teams losing, like where does Alabama fall to?
Yep. Where does Ole Miss? How far do they fall?
Out of the top 10? Do they drop beyond?
Do they
number
drop
12?
Indiana? I mean, where does Indiana go?
Yeah, like where does South Carolina?
Here's the thing: is like, how do you?
Ole Miss do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of teams, a lot of shaking up, and you can't really look at, the AP polls came out. They got Clemson at 12, South Carolina at 14. I guess you can kind of take that as a baseline. They got Bama at 13, but really, I think that South Carolina and Clemson were both ranked lower in the AP poll than they were in the college football playoff poll this past week.
Yeah,
I think they had South Carolina at 20 or 21 or something like that, but they were 18th in the college football. Yeah. So you kind of have the AP as like a baseline of like where you might be, but you could see Clemson potentially be 11. You could see South Carolina potentially be 12 or 13. And here's the thing: is like they could easily put them in those two rankings at like a 12-13 or 11-12 or 11-13, something like that, because the game next week, that'll kind of settle that out.
Yeah, it's
between those two.
There's just a lot that can happen in the next 2 weeks, and then you factor in the conference championship games. Like we don't even know who. I think there's one team that we know for sure. I think that is going to be in their conference championship game, and that's Oregon
and Georgia. Georgia's locked in.
Okay.
Yeah, Georgia's locked in, and then whoever wins between Texas and Texas A&M will play Georgia.
And
crazy.
So, I mean,
but
just
here's the thing:
Texas
is like Lane Kiffin said, like a lot of these teams don't want to play in their conference championship because it could hurt them. Like, you take Georgia for example; like they're coming in with 2 losses. Georgia has 2 losses, right?
Yeah.
They go in and let's say they have to play Texas and they lose to Texas. I mean, that's if Georgia's sitting at 9, let's just say they're sitting at 9 this week, and they go into that championship game and lose. Do they fall out? I mean, mean, there's a lot of and Lane Kiffin made this argument. It doesn't matter for him now, but some of these teams don't want to play in it. in the back of their mind, they're thinking, hey, this could hurt us more than help us. If you're a Texas A&M and you get into that game, it can obviously help you more than it could do anything. Because obviously, if you win, you don't have to worry about where you're ranked. You get into the playoffs.
I just think the biggest question mark is how many teams from each conference get in. Does the ACC get a second team? I mean, it's very well possible. I mean, shoot, Clemson still has a chance to make the ACC championship game.
Yeah, I told Levi this in our group chat that I think that Clemson's going to get in because I think that Miami. I truly think Miami is going to lose this week, and it doesn't matter if Clemson wins or loses this week as far as the ACC championship game. Like if Miami loses, Clemson's in.
Sorry, the Panthers are driving against the Chiefs right now. I don't know, man. It's obviously Clemson still has a lot to play for. If they beat South Carolina this coming weekend, that's a big ranked opponent that some teams don't have. Texas doesn't have that. So like if Texas, honest to God, I think if Texas loses to Texas A&M next weekend, they shouldn't be nowhere near the college football playoff in the top 12.
They will be though.
They have no ranked wins, and that's my thing. I think that's where people kind of get exhausted talking with. But I think that's where people get exhausted, and I guess it applies to SEC now because Texas is in the SEC. But it's like you've got a team at number 3 who has not beat anybody this year. The hardest game they've played, they lost, or the toughest team they played, they lost.
It's the same thing with Indiana.
But they barely beat Vanderbilt. But people are making the argument Indiana shouldn't be in there.
I'm making that argument.
My thing. But you have to keep it 100 with Texas.
Yeah, for sure.
Texas has essentially the same exact type of resume that Indiana has. So, like, if people are going to say, well, if Texas should be in there, well, my God, Indiana should be there.
Right.
Because they essentially are the same team. Just one's in the SEC and it's Texas. The other is traditionally an inferior team in Indiana, but they've got a hot first-year head coach in Kirk Cignetti, came from James Madison, had him undefeated going into yesterday, that was the toughest opponent. But again, like if people are going to make the argument that Texas deserves it, well, so does Indiana at the same time.
Yeah. I don't think Indiana deserves it. They played the 100th toughest schedule in the nation. They finally play one, they play a ranked team. They get throttled. Same thing for Texas though. I mean, their schedule was 53rd, somewhere in there. They have 0 ranked wins.
Yeah.
And I saw something like they haven't even played, even within the SEC.
A team with a winning record.
Yeah, they
haven't beat a team with a winning record in the SEC play.
At least 2. Have you played at least 2 SEC teams with a winning record in conference play? No. Texas has not played even 2 teams with a winning record in conference play.
They struggled against Arkansas. They struggled against Vanderbilt. They lost to Alabama. They still have Texas A&M to play next week. And again, I don't know. Like my thing is if you're going to treat one team that you want this way, if you've got another team on the opposite side, you got to treat them the same way. So if people are saying Texas deserves to be in, even if they
honestly Penn State, Penn State would have to be in that same argument. Like who have they beat?
But they're on. Wait, have they lost one game?
Yeah,
they lost to Ohio State. Sorry, they lost to Ohio State. Yeah, again, you just have to. My thing is you just have to keep it 100 across the entire board.
Yeah,
if you're going to say, and I'm just referring to Texas because Ole Miss played themselves out yesterday, and we're going to get into Ole Miss here in just a second. I think Alabama played themselves out yesterday. But again, who are these other
teams?
That's
what I'm saying is with the 3 lost teams and even with the head-to-head, I think it matters when you lose and how you lose because South Carolina hasn't lost in 5 weeks. They have the longest active winning streak in SEC play. They've won 5 in a row. And since then, you've had teams like Georgia, like Alabama. Obviously, everybody else in the SEC has lost at some point, within those 5 weeks. I think it matters. Again, when did you last lose? Okay, we last lost in September, or was that Alabama game in October? I think the Alabama game might have been in October. So you haven't lost since October, and then you barely lost that game. Should have won it.
Yeah.
Beat yourself. Again, you still lost.
Yeah.
But then when you look at Alabama and you say, okay, they just lost and they just got throttled. So when you go to look at that head-to-head, you got to say, okay, well, since that head-to-head, South Carolina's looked better. Alabama has not. Alabama has lost since then, and they lost bad since then. So if you stuck those two and said, okay, here's for the 12th spot, you got South Carolina and Clemson. We're going to decide between those two. I think you would have to – obviously, I'm a South Carolina fan. But if you just look at what they've done during the season, how the season's gone, if they beat Clemson, that'll be another ranked win for South Carolina. You would have to take them over Alabama. You would have to take them over Ole Miss, even though Ole Miss throttled South Carolina at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
I think it truly matters when you lose games. And it's better
there should be
to have losses, lose them at the beginning of the year, and then just go on a streak like South Carolina has done.
But again, going specifically to head-to-head, even though South Carolina is looking better, playing better the past month and a half, but when you get to the head-to-head discussing Alabama and Ole Miss, like, okay, what do they look like in comparison? I don't think it should totally go into when you lose. Like, I mean, if Ole Miss, they lost to Florida yesterday. But again, like I don't know. I feel like it's a complicated matter because there's no set formula to look at. You're factoring in the human element, and when the head-to-head, like, I don't know, like it's so tough to say the head-to-head because there's so many factors that goes into it. If they're all playing the same, then I think it is. Then you can factor it in. But again, you go to last week, South Carolina, LSU had the same record. LSU beat us head-to-head, but we were still ranked ahead of them because everybody knows, like, okay, this is the better team. If you're just talking specifically Alabama and Ole Miss, like, if there's nothing to distinctly separate us in terms of, okay, I think the way Alabama played last night does not help their case, but then they also throttled LSU 2 weeks ago. I don't know. It's tough. Like, I do think the head-to-head matchups matter, but I think context,
it's not the end all be all.
Things look like matter as well.
Right. I think it all matters. There is no set, okay, you lost Alabama, so no matter what, if it comes down to you two, you lost to them, so you're out because of the head-to-head. Because Alabama, it's the same thing with Florida State last year and not making the playoffs then. Like, you didn't put them in because so many things had happened where like, okay, they're not going to be able to compete right now. And so if you look at South Carolina or Alabama or Ole Miss, these teams, even though you have head-to-head losses, you got to say, okay, well, one team is clearly playing better than the others right now.
Yeah.
And when there is no set in stone, formula for how they decide these things, when you lose also matters too, because you just showed them a loss. So when they go and they look at these teams, they're going to say, okay, well, this team won. They're not going to say, oh, yeah, but 7 weeks ago they lost. Okay, well, this team lost now. That team lost 6 weeks ago. There's a big difference in that. There's a big difference in when you're losing, how you lose, who you lose to, and then just in general how you're looking, currently. And South Carolina, like I said, South Carolina is looking like a better team. If you were to say, okay, we've take that head-to-head, they lost to Alabama back then, they lost to Ole Miss back then. If you put them and played them right now, based on how they look right now and how they're playing right now, would the same outcome happen 10 out of 10 times? And it definitely wouldn't. You can't say right now that 10 out of 10 times Alabama would beat South Carolina again right now. 10 out of 10 times.
Sorry.
You couldn't say that 10 out of 10 times that Ole Miss would beat South Carolina right now. If you can't say that, then the head-to-head that was 6 or 7 weeks ago can't weigh as heavily. Not that it doesn't have any weight at all, but it can't weigh as heavily.
Yeah.
And again, we don't know how they make these decisions.
Yeah.
We don't know what they value more.
it's the human element, and it's it's I think the head to head is number one. Like, okay, we've got three teams, A, B, and C, all have the same record. Okay, have they played each other? Yes. When did they play each other? Okay, how do they look now? Like, and again, I think it's one of many factors that go into determining who should be ranked where.
Yeah.
But again, like you mentioned with Florida State last year, I don't think anybody, I definitely think Florida State deserved to make it. But when you look at the teams, the four best teams, they were not one of the four best teams.
No.
Because the big piece, like if you take Lenore Sellers or Cade Klubnik out of South Carolina and Clemson, are they one of the best teams in the country? Probably not. And so again, I feel like we're just going to do the song and dance. It's everybody has their own opinion.
The AP's already kind of showed you what they think of head to head. They've got Ole Miss ranked behind South Carolina, so there was a head to head, and that was South Carolina's worst head to head. Like that was one it wasn't close. But now they look at Ole Miss and they say, okay, how do they look right now? Oh, and they
team
just
that's
lost.
trending downwards.
Right,
South
exactly.
You trending up, Ole Miss trending down. And so again, like
people are showing you head to head is not the end all be all. Like,
if Ole Miss would have lost to, I don't know, Alabama by 4 points or 3 points or something, I think they have a better case than we do. But it's the fact that they lost to a Florida team who I think are right at 500 or right above 500 or right under 500. That's a loss to your resume. Whereas, taking Penn State, like, again, I think you could treat Texas, Penn State, Indiana, all the same. Like it should be the same across the board.
I would say Miami too. I think if Miami loses this week, to Syracuse and they don't get into the ACC championship, they're not one of the 12 best. You can't say that they are.
Yeah, and if honestly, if one of those teams loses, and let's just say, I don't know, dude. Like if Clemson beats us this weekend, and SMU or Miami lose, I mean, Clemson's got just as much an argument.
They do. Yeah.
After beating us, if they beat us, that's a big ranked win that some of these one-loss teams don't have. So it's like, where are you going to go with it?
Yeah, this Palmetto Bowl is huge. It's the most important Palmetto Bowl that has ever been played because both of these teams need this win to make their case. Now, Clemson has an easier path because they can obviously get into the ACC championship game. South Carolina doesn't have that. So this would be – and honestly, if South Carolina beats Clemson, Miami loses, Clemson gets in, and Clemson wins the ACC, that's even more of a resume boost for South Carolina.
Yeah.
If they win the ACC because your last win was against the ACC champion. Yeah. I mean, there's so many –
It's just in turmoil right now because it's like there's no team that's separating themselves.
Right.
You've got 1 through – honestly, there should be maybe 3 teams that are guaranteed a spot, in my opinion, outside of the conference champions, Oregon, Georgia, and probably Ohio State. That's stretching a little bit.
Even if Georgia loses in the conference championship, like you think they're guaranteed to get in?
Honestly, dude, I don't know.
Georgia could lose this week.
But again, I don't think you should punish a team for making to their conference championship game and losing, where it's like other teams are sitting at home. Like it's the whole argument with Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame sits there and is rewarded with berths to the college football playoff or something when teams are playing in the conference championship and they're sitting at home. So I don't think a team should be penalized that greatly for making their conference championship. Now, if Georgia's like 11 and they get beat by 4 touchdowns, that's different. But if it's Georgia, Texas A&M, and Texas A&M wins by 3 points or something, and Georgia was at 6, I don't understand how you can drop them so many points for playing in the conference championship when teams are not playing. And and then Georgia would have the same record as a South Carolina, but Georgia's got a little bit, in my opinion, a little bit better of a resume, and they played in their conference championship. So I don't think teams should be penalized for making their conference championship if they've got the resume to outweigh that loss.
Yeah.
Like if Miami or SMU loses let's just say Miami SMU makes the AC championship game, that loser's maybe not going to make it.
Right.
That's just a matter of fact. Now, if SMU beats Miami, Miami could possibly make it because I just don't know how you justify. I don't know. It's just there's so much that can happen because the conference, you 1 through 5 are already decided. It's the conference champions, and then the group of 5. So like the group of I don't know. There's just so much can happen, and you just don't know the way it's going to go.
Yeah. That's it.
So,
like your best group of 5 team almost lost yesterday as well. I've completely forgot about that. The Boise State almost lost.
Boise State, yeah. So
I think that this week actually created, obviously there was chaos, but it truly did make things more chaotic with how many teams.
Yeah.
And how many teams, I think what made it more chaotic was that even outside of just South Carolina fans, like national media people are making the case for South Carolina as well. People that never had anything to do with South Carolina, they're making the case for the Gamecocks as well. And so when you have 6 teams in front of a team like South Carolina that national media are also vying for and making a case for, that makes it so much more chaotic, especially when like 2 or 3 of them were right in front of them.
Yeah. So it's definitely going to be interesting, but again, like Caleb said in the comments earlier,
you just got to beat Clemson.
We can't control that. Us as fans don't need to worry about that. We can make our case after the season ends. Like we beat Clemson, we have a legitimate case. We lose to Clemson, all this manpower and all these people saying X, Y, and Z, this, and this, saying we should be there is completely wasted. Because
but I will say this: if you're not making the case now, week after week, it's hard to come up in the last week and make a case. So as aggravating as it can be sometimes,
like us as fans don't need to say it. Like
right. What I'm saying, but you do. So, you got to get it out there. You got to get it out there. You got to get it out there.
People on that committee don't listen to these random Twitter followers with 872 followers.
No, not them. But I'm saying, like, if the fans aren't making the case, then that state level guy isn't making the case. And then if that state level guy ain't making the case, then the national media isn't making the case.
Well, they're watching.
But if you're out there and you're drumming it up, what I'm saying is, Kyle, if you're not making the case now for 4 weeks, you can't come up, last week of the season, and say, did you see what we did the last 6 weeks?
We're making the case making the case by winning 5 games. Like me tweeting, it's not going to do anything. Let's win.
Why can't we enjoy it? Why can't we make the case?
We can
pump our team up. The only people that truly need to be focused on Clemson is the guys that's going out there on the field. Like,
I get
that, making the case isn't going to make any difference in how they.
But again, like you make your case based off your resume, and we lose. We no longer have a resume capable of making the playoffs.
True.
So let's win this game. Let's win Saturday.
We don't control that though. Like I want to be able to make my case. You boys that are on the field, y'all focus solely on.
Yeah, I mean, if they decided the college football playoff rankings today, then if that was the rankings that came out Tuesday or be in the playoff, then yes, that's fine. But if we lose, it was all for nothing. Let's win. Then as fans and followers of college football, then can make that whole entire argument because we've got the full resume. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion.
The other thing is
I'm going to input that scene from like the reunion of one of those Real Housewives where it's like, that's my opinion.
But we only see it because we're South Carolina fans, and the algorithm is just going to show you what South Carolina people are saying. But every other team that's kind of in our position, their fan base is doing the exact same thing. We're just not seeing it as much. Yeah, Tennessee's doing it.
Same thing for other teams.
Yeah, but that's just what it is. That's just how it is. Let's make the case. And then they go and win the football game. That is key, though. Win the football game. Anything outside of that, it's not going to matter if you don't win. But there's a lot of games this coming up week that I think will be crucial. to both South Carolina and Clemson, especially Miami. That's going to be a big one because I think the only team outside of Miami and SMU in the ACC that could potentially get in as a second team would be Clemson. So if Miami does win and Clemson does beat South Carolina, they would still have a case to say we're in, we should be in the playoffs as well. I don't think that if SMU or, like you said, Miami, if they don't win the ACC, I don't think either one of them would have a big enough case like Clemson would.
Sorry, I got parents texting me all these photos for a video I'm going to make. So, again, it's win, then make the argument. That's it. Just win and make the argument. Because it's.
I wouldn't even talk about South Carolina no more.
Just win and make the argument. One more thing before we get out of here. I don't know. I guess I'm just a softy at heart, but I do truly kind of feel bad for Juice Wells at Ole Miss.
No,
I do. I mean, he gets. I mean, he got what.
He got what he asked for.
Exactly. Like, let's kind of talk about his reasoning for leaving South Carolina. Every concern that he had was legitimate. I'll give him that. Like, we a lot of unknowns about our offense and our football team before the season began. Let's call a spade a spade. That is very true. We had all our concerns, and every concern he had was legitimate. Now, what he did was went and chased the bag, and I honestly think he would have been better off probably going to Texas, because Oklahoma hammered the portal hard in the offseason and got two guys who probably were better than him, but his draft stock has tanked this year. He now has two fan bases that absolutely hate him. I couldn't find the one he tried to one-hand grab last night. I couldn't find it. I saw the interception at the end. I don't know. It should just go to show you with how the transfer portal is the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Like, he would have been the focal point of our offense this year.
Yep.
Like, him and Rocket Sanders, like, that could have been a good 1-2 punch with the rushing attack and the passing game. Like, having Juice Wells on the team would have taken a lot of unnecessary, or maybe I don't know the word I'm trying to think, like, pressure off the other guys, where it would have just allowed like a Lard Vidan or a Brown just kind of go under the radar. And Juice Wells is probably the fourth or best receiver. I mean, I don't know. I do feel bad for him, because I think
he's a grown man that made a grown man decision, and it didn't work out.
I think it goes beyond him. I think he's got people in his ear that are in his camp that don't truly have his best intentions in mind. It's all about getting the money, which if you're going to get it, I guess.
And that's why I don't feel bad for him. If money wasn't involved and he just said, look, I've got to go to someone with more experience. There's kind of uncertainty here.
Because he
also went and got more money.
But he didn't get much more than what he was getting at South Carolina. I know that for
this. His main
the message boards that I subscribe to, like, he didn't get much more. I think realistically he got less to go to Ole Miss.
But his main objective was not 100%. I got to get out of here because of an inexperienced quarterback. Like, money was involved, because if it wasn't, there would have been, like, he would have said, hey, I want to play with Jackson Dart. And that's it. Like, there would have been no, hey, let me see what Texas is offering. Let me see what Ole Miss is offering. Let me see what South Carolina is going to, there would have been none of that. Like, if there was zero money involved, I would say, okay, I feel bad for him, because he made a decision that he had legitimate reasoning for, and it didn't work out for him. But, like, also it was the way that he left and the things that he said, and just like the whole ordeal with how he did. Like, that's why I don't feel bad for him. Like, you did all these things beforehand that set you up that now you made a bad decision. And here's the thing is, like, even though it hasn't worked out for him in his decision making. And, obviously he's like the fourth best receiver. Like when they've gone to him, he hasn't made the plays. Just like yesterday, he drops a touchdown pass. He runs the wrong route on the last play of the game. Like he's done this multiple times throughout the season.
Yeah. And I
where
think
he just hasn't, his play hasn't helped him.
Yeah. And I think that goes to coaching. Like I think that speaks probably a lot to Lane Kiffin as a coach, because you could definitely tell his confidence is at an all-time low.
Yeah.
And I just don't think there's anybody there on that staff or whoever that are there to like pick him up mentally. And I think that's where you run into the downside of the transfer portal, where the majority of the people there are there because this team offered them the most money. And they were, had a lot of hype around them. And you just get players who were not bought into the system and the culture you want to build. And I think, with the way South Carolina's done it, it's, not every transfer portal guy you get is going to be a success, but you bring the right type of people in here who believe what you are doing and not just coming for a check. Halfway, after 3 or 4 games after the LSU game, when Lenoris got hurt, we didn't really know what he was going to be about or how serious his injury was. Robbie Ashford came in. Everybody on the South Carolina fan base shouted from the rooftops, why didn't we go and get somebody more, or I guess better, in the transfer portal this offseason other than Robbie Ashford, where Shane Beamer said there's definitely people who wanted to come, but they wanted to be guaranteed a starting spot. And I think they just did not fit the type of player he wants in his program. People give Dabo a lot of crap about not going into the portal, but I do think it plays a major factor in, other than just throwing tons of money at somebody. You look at the guy that I think was transferring from Vanderbilt or somewhere that ended up at Boston College, where he originally committed to play at Carolina, and then he was leveraging, and he said, so I think there's rumblings he was going to go visit Boston College. They asked him, he's like, no. He went anyways and leveraged their NIL offer to try to get more with South Carolina. And Beamer's like, that's not what we're doing. You go and do your own thing. So it's more than just going out and getting the best player available at a position. It clearly seems Juice Wells was not a fit for that offense or in that culture, and it just didn't work out. But unfortunately, he's out of time. I don't think he has any more eligibility in college football. So it is what it is. I mean, you have to live and die by your decisions. I hope he has success in the NFL. And what the reason why, again, he had every gripe he had was reasonable. It's understandable. But clear, he wanted to win, and they've got the same record as we do. And I do think Jackson Dart's,
I think even more than that was that he, like you said, like he could have been the number 1 guy here, where he's the number 4 guy there.
Yeah, and he's trending downwards.
Yeah,
I mean, he is. So, but anyways,
last thing, I know that you didn't see this. Did you see the way that Arizona State game ended?
Well, I knew there was a situation where there was like 1 second on the clock. They had fans on the stand fans stormed the field. You had Arizona State's coach like berating a referee with his wife right beside him.
What they did was Arizona State had the ball, and I think they had like a chance to score. The player goes down, so that they don't score and give the opponent enough time to try and make a Hail Mary or something. Yeah. So instead of eventually scoring, what they did was they took a snap and the quarterback just ran backwards for like 30 yards. And so then they're out of field goal range. Well, they did it again, and it was 4th down. There was 7 seconds left on the clock. Arizona State snaps the football. He kind of runs backwards, and then they get right there to him. So he just throws it as high as he could, because they have to wait until the ball lands to call it a down play, because obviously somebody could try and catch it or whatever, but it was going out of bounds. The clock showed 0, but then when they went and looked back at it, they said there's actually 1 second left on the clock as the ball is traveling out of bounds on the throwaway. So as the clock hits 0 there, fans storm the field. They got to get all the fans back off the field because there's 1 second left. And where they had ran backwards so far, then BYU actually had a chance to throw a Hail Mary because they were at like midfield when they got the ball on the turnover on down. So just insane, because I kept looking at the score and it kept showing 1 second left. And I was like, this game ended 20 minutes ago. How is ESPN saying there's still 1 second left? So then I go and I look and they're like clearing fans off the field talking about 1 second left on the clock. Just madness.
You know, if that happens in the SEC, I think the schools get fined twice.
Yeah.
Because they storm the field before the game's over, then they storm the field after the game. So that's all I got for today. We'll have we'll get together, Stephen, and try to decide on a time, preferably, Wednesday night, evening. So I think you have to work this week. I'm off. So that way we'll recap, or we'll react to the current college football playoff rankings. We'll discuss the Carolina Clemson game. We'll talk some other rival games, try to get some people on. Should be a good show. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of chaos still to happen, I think. And a lot of it will determine on where these teams kind of shake out. And I think you'll know if you have a realistic shot. I still think that if South Carolina is anywhere higher than 15, then they should have a realistic chance of making the playoffs with some other things going their way.
Yeah. Panthers don't look that bad right now, man.
Good. I hope they win. They need to win, and Cowboys need to keep losing.
Yeah.
Let's just get that draft pick.
Who you going to draft?
I don't know.
You can't draft quarterback. You just gave Dak all that money.
We'll see. If you get the number 1 pick, you could always trade that sucker away. Just move down 2 or 3 slots.
Panthers might trade you their picks.
Yeah, we'll get 2 or 3 more first rounders, a lineman or 2. Who knows?
You need to work on that big window in y'all's football stadium that blinds your players all the time.
Yeah, look, that kind of stuff isn't going to change until Jerry's gone. So should be anyway. It should be fun once these rankings come out. Truly, even outside of South Carolina, I'm just curious to see how they handle Indiana, where they slot Alabama, how far Ole Miss falls.
Yeah,
I mean, there's 2 or 3 teams that could potentially still be in that slot. The playoff slots that lost this week. So
yeah, for sure. So we'll have our high school recap episode. Again, congratulations to the PD Eagles 2004 season 2A state champions. We'll be back Wednesday, or have our high school recap episode Tuesday. Do our live episode again on Wednesday. So enjoy the rest of NFL Sunday. We'll see y'all next week.